Good morning. It is Thursday, June the 1st, and today we are in 1 Timothy chapter 3. I'm going to be starting today just looking at verses 1 through 7. And this is a very, very important passage of scripture for the church in that it outlines qualifications for elders, pastors in the church. So this is what he says. This is a faithful saying. If a man desires the position of a bishop, he desires a good work. A bishop then must be blameless, the husband of one wife, temperate, sober-minded, of good behavior, hospitable, able to teach, not given to wine, not violent, not greedy for money, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not covetous. One who rules his own house well, having his children in submission with all reverence. For if a man does not know how to rule his own house, how will he take care of the church of God? Not a novice, lest being puffed up with pride he fall into the same condemnation as the devil. Moreover, he must have a good testimony among those who are outside, lest he fall into reproach and the snare of the devil. Okay, so there's a lot. There's a lot in here to unpack. And so we'll just start at the top. First, he says, if any man desires the position of a bishop, pastor, overseer, those elder, those terms are used interchangeably in the New Testament. It's somebody who is the shepherd of the flock. He's the overseer of the work. Okay? He says, if a man desires the position, he desires a good work. That's a good thing. First qualification, he must be blameless. Literally, the term means to be above reproach. It has the idea of he's not a person who can have an accusation of wrong easily laid against him. It doesn't mean that he's not a sinner, because that person doesn't exist outside of Christ. It just means that he's not going to be easily accused of wrongdoing, because he has a sterling reputation. Says the husband of one wife. Literally, the phrase in the Greek means he's a one-woman man. He's not a womanizer. He's not flirtatious. He is a dedicated husband. That's what this phrase means, okay? Some people have tried to say, oh, that means he can't have more than one wife. That's also true, but the phrase itself in the Greek carries more the connotation of he's a one-woman man. It says also he's temperate. He's self-controlled. He's not flighty. Sober-minded. Well, he's sober-minded, of good behavior, hospitable. He's a welcoming person who welcomes people into his presence, into his home. He's very approachable. he's able to teach. He has to have that gift of teaching. Not given to wine, some translation, much wine. It's not violent, not greedy for money. The Bible's very clear, the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. So a pastor is not one who's greedy for money. He's not these things, but what is he? He's gentle. He's not quarrelsome. Not covetous. He's not one who goes after things. He's one who rules his own house well, having his children in submission with all reverence. That doesn't mean he has perfect kids. I raised my kids they were in church weeks after they were born. They were dedicated to the Lord, raised in church, and I didn't have perfect kids, but I wasn't a perfect father. But I am thankful that I had children that when they grew up, they loved the Lord. Says he needs to be able to rule his household well, for if he can't rule his own household, how can he take care of the church of God? It's a rhetorical question. Verse 6, he's not a novice. He's not a new believer. He's not somebody who's green. You need some experience, some wisdom that comes from age and life experience. Because people will come to you with problems. And people will come to you for advice. And, if you need to be able to be a good counselor, a good confidant. But also, one of the things that comes with experience is humility. The longer you live, the more you mess up. It's just facts. And hopefully you learn from those mistakes. But he says, not a novice, lest being puffed up with pride to fall into the same condemnation as the devil. And then here's something else that's interesting. It says that he must have a good testimony among those who are outside the church, lest he fall into the reproach and snare of the devil. And not only does he have a good reputation, be above reproach within the fellowship of believers, but outside the church, he must be a respected citizen. And I think these are all key, important. These are the qualifications. Okay, so how do we apply this to our life? I think the first thing to think about is he says if anyone desires to be a bishop, he desires a good work. I remember years ago, there's a lot, another little catchphrase, a term that's used a lot is the call of God. Has God called you into ministry? And what does that look like? What does it mean to be called into ministry? I think it's important to understand this, because I think there's perhaps there's confusion. It basically means that God puts a desire in your heart. It's a burden. One of my professors years ago, Dr. Elmer Towns at Liberty University, taught evangelism years ago at Word of Life, and said a burden is like when a woman is pregnant and she's great with child and she's carrying this child and she just can't wait to give birth, to relieve that burden. It's something that it's even more than a strong desire. It's something that has to happen. And a burden from the Lord is when God places a burden on your heart that you feel like you'll die if you don't follow through with it. And so it's a desire. It's a strong desire rooted in God's calling on your life, that you feel this is what God would have you do. And being a pastor is definitely a calling. It's one that it was put to me this way: if you could be happy doing anything else, choose that instead. Because being an overseer in the Church of God is not for the faint of heart. It's not for people who are easily offended or easily put off, because God has some funny sheep. He's got some difficult sheep. He's got ornery sheep, and I'm one of them. And the importance of having that strong desire or that calling is because if you don't, you won't stick with it. There's not a coincidence that the average tenure of a pastor in a local church is only about 3 years, give or take. And I don't know. It's something that you have to enjoy God's people. You have to enjoy relationships with God's people, and you have to enjoy the process of growing in the Lord and rejoicing and seeing. And don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that it's not a very rewarding calling. It's a wonderful getting to see, be there when children are born and see them grow in the Lord, and walking with people through their cancer and seeing some of them come through healthy on the other side, and others maybe you perform a funeral and you grieve along with the family, but you grow some bonds that are invaluable, and a church truly becomes a family. And it's a wonderful calling, but you have to meet the qualifications. You have to be a person that has good character, not easily having an accusation laid against them. You have to be a faithful husband, a one-woman kind of man. You have to be even-keeled, temperate. You don't want a pastor can't be a hothead. It won't work. Have to be temperate, have to be gentle, have to have hospitality, to be able to teach. I mean, the qualifications, there's numerous qualifications. And so, how do we apply this to our life? Is there any sin here? There's no sin mentioned here, other than things to avoid, like one woman man being, it's not a thing that it's a thing that would disqualify a man from serving God in that capacity. So just look at all those things. Not giving them much wine, not greedy for money. Those would all be things that would be disqualifying. What about promises to claim or principles to apply? Well, the principle, I think, here is that if a person desires to be an overseer in the church, he desires a good work, and it is a good work. It's wonderful. Examples to learn from. I've had pastors I've learned from, both good and bad. And there's no such thing as a perfect pastor. We all have our strengths and our weaknesses. But I'm thankful for all of them, good men. Love the Lord. And I have many good friends that are pastors. I'm grateful for all of them as well. And I learn from them. Commands to obey. There's not a command imperative here. But there's a lot to be thankful for. When I think about pastors and mentors that I've had who God put in my life over the years, I have so much to be thankful for. And I hope that I've been a pastor to the church that God's put me in to shepherd the flock. That I feel loved. I hope that as time goes by, years go by, that I'll have left a good legacy. That's all I have for today. Kind of a personal, very personal passage for me, as it applies directly to me. That's all I have for today. I hope you have a great day. We'll see you again tomorrow.